Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. The division championship Minnesota Twins are looking to go all the way to the World Series in 2024. Bolstered by inspirational shortstop Carlos Correa, a healthy Brian Buxton, and rookie phenom Royce Lewis, plus a pitching staff led by Pablo Lopez and an outstanding bullpen featuring Johan Duran, the Twins are the best bargain in the major leagues, and Target Field is the best venue in baseball. Sheridan Dulas & Kins, PA, a family and criminal defense law firm, has been serving clients in Dakota County and throughout Minnesota for over 40 years. Ranked a Tier 1 Best Law Firm by U.S. News and World Report every year since 2009, Sheridan Dulas & Kins are here to help you in your most difficult life circumstances. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Steve Francisco. Thank you for joining us today. We have a familiar face in our studio, our return visitor, Minnesota State Senator Jim Carlson, who represents District 52, Eagan, and a portion of Mendota Heights and a portion of Burnsville. Did I get those right? Did I miss any?
The entire city of Mendota.
The entire city of Mendota. Yes. Thank you, Jim. Thanks for being our guest coming on Access to Democracy. We're really happy to have you back on. Tell our viewers who may have missed some of your prior appearances, what does your district include again? I just mentioned some of the cities. Did we get them all?
Yes, we got all the cities. Like you say, that in the redistricting that happened a couple of years ago, I lost some of Burnsville, but gained almost all of Mendota Heights. So now we have Mendota Heights that goes all the way up to the river. It does not include Lilydale, which is across the street from Mendota Heights. It includes most of Eagan, and what happened there was we swapped a part that I didn't have for a part that I did. So now I have northern Eagan, that is north of Lone Oak Road, but I don't have Lebanon Hills Park area, which is south of Cliff Road. So we swapped that. So otherwise, Central Eagan is all in District 52. There are 3 precincts in Burnsville. It's the furthest east precincts, but it doesn't change the makeup very much. I don't think it changed the voter profile.
Right.
We still have all the conservative districts in Eagan and one of the conservative ones in
Maybe
Burnsville.
after the next reapportionment, you'll get Lilydale. You may have to trade it for something else. We'll see. You have served in the Minnesota Senate now since 2006. You
Correct.
were elected in
Yes.
2006, so you are in your 5th term. Is that correct?
Let's see.
Sounds
2006.
Your terms
12,
are every 4 years.
16, 20, and 22.
Yep. And you serve on several committees in the legislature in the Minnesota Senate, but you are the chair of a very important committee on a subject that we hear a lot about in the news and on the campaign trail these days. You are chair of the Senate Elections Committee.
That's correct.
And there was some really significant legislation that came out of your committee this year that actually made it all the way through the House and to Governor Walz's desk for his signature. Tell us about what happened in the Elections Committee.
Well, going back to the things that we don't like, and that is omnibus bills. Omnibus bills are those bills that we put a lot of things into that we have passed so that we don't have to spend as much time on the floor debating those, and we can debate the highlights because the bills have already gone through all the committees, and then we can get them passed as one bill, and the governor signs them as one bill. And what we don't like about them is that there is an article in the Constitution that talks about single subject, and it has to be described in the title. So we always have to make sure that these omnibus bills have a complete title. So even though we don't like them, they're very useful. They're very useful for getting things done.
Because you can attach things.
And the Republicans like them, the Democrats like them, because sometimes you can get things in there that otherwise would not pass on their own. So that's a real important issue.
And was one of those the Democracy for the People Act?
Yes, that was included in our omnibus bill, and that was the one where, now, Democracy for the People, we had a title for that included several bills in the past. But we had one that this year was called the Democracy for the People, and that was, that mainly contained a bill to override the 8th District court opinion that said that you and I cannot go and complain to the Elections Commission about an unfair elections process. It has to be only complained to the Attorney General, State Attorney General, which we said that's too restrictive. And also, it kind of eliminates the ability for you to go to almost anywhere, the governor, and complain. So we put that back into law. So that's in Minnesota law now, that if you are, especially in the cases of where there's people of color or minorities that have been discriminated against, you can itemize that description and take it to court.
What happened with respect to 18-year-olds? Didn't you pass legislation that provides for automatic voter registration for 18-year-olds? Tell us how this will
Well,
work.
it's automatic for everyone, really.
Yeah.
And that's something we've been trying to get for probably 20 years. And what that means is if you go to apply for your driver's license, it used to be that there was an opt-in, well, actually it was no option, and then it became opt-in, where you would, X a particular box and sign a line that said that you wanted to be registered and have this information, and you have to provide extra information for it, so that you can be registered at the same time you get your driver's license. What we wanted for a long time was something called an opt-out, and means you would automatically be registered unless you chose not to be. So the way that works today is that if you deal with almost any state agency and you are filling out forms for that, you will be registered unless and there'll be a card that comes to you and say, do you really want to be registered? And all you have to do is either not turn it back in or turn it back in and say, no, I don't want to be registered. And then you're automatically registered. So that's called an opt-out system.
Right. And we should mention Minnesota historically has had usually the highest percentage of eligible voter turnout in the country among all 50 states. Part of the reason for that has been the ease. We make it easier for people to register to vote. We have laws that allow people to vote by absentee when they need to. Basically, you don't need to declare a reason. You used to have to declare a reason that you needed an absentee vote. And the end result is we have the highest voter participation. Isn't that a good thing?
That's a good thing.
Isn't that what we should be trying to do?
I was recently in Kansas City with a meeting with people that have the same position I have. They're chairs of the elections committees in various states. And we had about 15 states that were represented there. And this is the second one of those that I've been to. And when I say I'm from Minnesota, it's Minnesota. Last time I was at that meeting, one person spoke up and said, we spend more time watching the results in Minnesota than we do in our own state. So
interesting.
That's, we're
seen as
very
a model.
complimentary.
So what do you say, Jim, when people say to you, well, you are opening the door for voter fraud, for people who are not eligible to vote, for illegal immigrants to come in and register to vote. What do you say to them when they bring that up?
It depends on what is the lead up to that question or the follow up. They don't vote. You don't knowingly go in and try to vote when you know that there's a felony awaiting you. You don't wake up in the morning. I think I'm going to
want to go
do a
commit
felony today. Yes,
Yeah.
But the fact is that there is a contract you sign on an application. Anybody that changes their registration knows that you have to sign that, and that's perjury if you lie about it. So we don't have a lot of perjurers. We do have, or we did have, a lot of people that would go and try, and remember, it's a felony to try to register if you're not eligible, and it's a felony to vote if you're not eligible. So we would have people coming to register, and when they got to that question, or if the election judge would ask them, or if they were filling it out at home and to mail it in, they wouldn't know what that meant. If you are, you've completed your sentence, you've completed your probation, you've completed your parole. Okay, what the probation and parole meant is that you're on paper,
Right.
meaning you're not totally finished with your judge-imposed oversight.
Sentence, right,
Yeah,
right.
But you've already completed the sentence, the incarceration sentence that you were
Well, after
sentenced
all,
to.
when people pay their debt to society, don't we want to reintegrate them into society, including voting rights?
I would think so. Yes,
Yeah, you would think so.
And
But
so
this-
what the issue was is that people would mistakenly do that, and to commit a felony, you have to intentionally do that.
Right.
So anybody that knows the law said that that's the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor, is that you have to intentionally do something that you know is wrong. So what would happen is that these people would, first of all, an election judge is not a cop, so they would write this complaint down, and it would be forwarded to the filter that is run by the county attorney. And so they would investigate these, and they would look at the ones that, hey, wait a second, this is somebody who just didn't know. And what they would do is either bring it down to maybe a misdemeanor or gross misdemeanor, but they would not charge them with a felony because they'd have to prove that they know better.
That they knew.
Yeah.
But back to the question I asked Jim, this argument that there are thousands of people voting in our elections who are not citizens, who are illegal immigrants, who have felony convictions, who are not eligible to vote, that's simply not true, is it?
Not true. No.
There are not statistics that back that up. There are always a few cases of people illegally voting,
Yep.
and those get referred to county attorneys who prosecute those according to the law.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And so far, I hate to be too overly partisan with it, but most of those that have gotten national attention have been Republicans that have either voted for their wife, so they voted twice, or they voted with in two locations. And in fact, what's really amazing is the Secretary of State of Indiana has voted twice in an election.
Who's in charge of elections
He's
for
in
the state
charge
of Indiana.
Yeah.
That's
So,
interesting.
those are the things that were happening. And of course, what happens with the people that are those kinds of conspiracy theorists, they
Right.
magnify it by about 1,000,000 times.
So Minnesota's protecting this right to vote for 18-year-olds,
Yes.
and also a new provision, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. Say a word about that. How does that
Yeah.
work?
Well, that was a bill that was written actually by a young Egan youth in government person. And Dan brought that to me in 2013, and I introduced it as a bill. The Republicans had the majority in the House, and so one of the friendly people, Dean Erdahl, introduced it there. I had a couple of Republicans come to me and say, no, Jim, 16-year-olds, they're too young to vote. And I'd say, gosh, this isn't to vote, it's just to
No.
register.
To
And
pre-register.
Today,
Yeah.
you can pre-register. You always have been able to pre-register for several years if you're 17 and are going to turn 18 by the next election. That would allow you to pre-register. Well, now it's 16, so when you get your driver's license, you can automatically pre-register. It's held in software until you turn 18 or until the election happens, and then suddenly your registration becomes valid.
Interesting. Let's jump to some other issues. Our time is spinning by as it always does. Education, some big developments out of the legislature on education. Tuition freeze at state colleges, free tuition for families making under $80,000 a year.
Yep, yeah. Those are some things that, and I'm not on the higher education committee, so I have to refer to my cheat book here, that we did a lot of things, a lot of things that have gotten some notice. They were simple ones.
Right.
Like we now allow the school districts to issue a cell phone policy for cell phones in class. And as you well know, my wife has been a teacher in this building for
many years.
16
right here
years.
At Egan High School.
Yep. And she said, boy, I'm glad they're doing that. But what happens when you have an assignment that has to be fulfilled by going onto the phone?
Right.
So the school districts, depending on their curriculum, they can make a modification and allow that
And this
to
is
happen.
not a problem that you and I ever had to worry about when we were going through school. There were no cell phones.
Right.
We were still using the abacus, perhaps.
Yeah.
But now kids have these phones. But we want the focus to be on when the teacher is speaking and trying to pass knowledge along. We want students to be focused on that at hand rather than texting on social media or doing other things.
And realistically, one of the big fears is that what happens when a school gets under attack.
Yep.
And
Goes
so
into lockdown.
the schools have to figure out what their possibility is of that. And I know of some teachers that they've been banning cell phones in kids' hands for a long time. What they would do is they would make the student turn the cell phone off, and then they put it on top of a locker that was in the room. So it was still accessible to the student if it was needed in an emergency, but it wasn't something that they could play games on at their desk.
Right. Let's shift gears to healthcare. Some big developments on healthcare. Prescription Drug Affordability Board. Tell us what happened there with respect to that.
The only thing I know about that is that we did pass it, but it was one of those things that we wanted to make sure that there wasn't gouging.
Price gouging on prescription drugs.
Yeah.
Right.
And we all know that there are some entities, corporations, individuals, whatever, that they will gouge if the gouging is very profitable. Like, I think you know what an Airbnb costs during the Super Bowl.
Right.
And, and all of these kinds of things that happen. So, and some companies they don't participate in that.
Right.
And because I worked for 3M didn't do that.
Yeah.
Even during the pandemic, they said, we will not sell respirators to anyone that does gouging.
Right.
So, but there are a lot of places that do gouge.
But we're talking
for
about
instance, the
prescription drugs like that people need for chronic illnesses such as diabetes. They may have diabetes and they need their Ozempic or Wegovy or other things, or asthma or allergies. They need their EpiPens. And so this is trying to put a check on uncontrolled prescription drug prices, isn't it?
Yes. And that, we're talking about one of the most complicated markets in the world, because when you go to Walgreens and buy your product there, they have no choice as to what to charge you. And
they charge what the manufacturer tells them to charge.
And there's all kinds of things behind the scenes, like rebates and things like that. And it depends on where those rebates go.
Right.
So the rebates generally have gone to something called a PBM. That's a pharmacy benefit manager.
Right.
And if you talk to a lot of people, they say that is an absolute useless level of pharmaceutical handling in the world, and they should be banned.
Jim, I know you recall, as I do, some years back when Mark Dayton, before he was governor, when he was U.S. Senator, used to sponsor bus trips up into Canada, to Manitoba, I think up to Winnipeg, so that people could buy their prescription drugs that they needed, and they were a fraction of the price of what was being charged here in Minnesota. So, what accounts for these huge price disparities that seem really indefensible?
And even before that, you may remember how Governor Tim Pawlenty got crosswise with the National Republicans on trying to import drugs from Canada.
Right.
And his famous statement was, well, show me all the dead Canadians.
Right.
If you don't think
and there weren't
safe.
any.
And there aren't any.
Right.
Yes.
Let's talk about reproductive freedom. Minnesota is sort of an island in the upper Midwest in terms of protecting a woman's right to choose in terms of reproductive freedom and not putting undue limitations or restraints that effectively abolish the right to obtain an abortion to terminate a pregnancy. Other states surrounding us have gone in quite the opposite direction since the Dobbs decision by the U.S. Supreme Court 2 years ago that overturned Roe versus Wade. What are your thoughts about how Minnesota is doing in terms of protecting reproductive freedom?
There's a lot of misinformation and, let's say, rumor in that issue. One is, I always have believed that a person should be responsible. Personal responsibility used to be a password for the Republicans. Well, personal responsibility also should apply when a person is getting medical help, some kind of medical service. I trust women. I don't want to have...
You trust them more than state legislators who don't have medical degrees?
Some.
I mean, no, seriously.
Yep.
You know, we have legislators, and I'm talking not just in Minnesota, obviously around the country, who think that they know better than a woman and her doctor
That's right.
how to
Yep.
protect their health care.
And the funny thing is that we still have 3 doctors in the Minnesota Senate, and they all support the freedom for women to make their own choices. And that's how I feel too, is that women should be able to make their choices without having the police or anybody else threaten them, and threaten the doctor as well.
Right.
Now, that is law in Minnesota now. And some people don't realize it because they're writing me emails saying, don't change the law to allow abortion after birth, which is it's a ridiculous statement. It's never happened.
There's
it
no
doesn't
such
happen.
thing,
There
is
is
there?
no such
Because
thing.
once a baby is born, it is in fact a legal person, and that would be murder if you murdered that
it would
child.
be infanticide.
Yeah.
Infanticide.
Infanticide,
Yeah.
right.
And there are babies that do die. There are babies that there is nothing that can be done with them because there's something called Potter's syndrome, and that's a syndrome where that baby will probably not survive outside the womb. And many times it's because the baby is getting all of the nourishment from the umbilical cord. So as soon as that umbilical cord is cut, that's a death sentence for that baby. And the women that know about this, and that's one of the problems that we have in Texas is they're not even able to go in and get services to find out if their baby is viable or not.
Well, and because you don't have providers in many of these states, and providers are leaving places like South Dakota, it leaves women who need those services no option but to go to
That's
another
right.
state. Many of them are coming here from North and South Dakota, from Iowa, perhaps from Wisconsin.
But back on that abortion after death, they can tell, the doctors can
after
tell
birth,
that there is, after birth. The doctors can tell that this fetus has its heart and lungs outside of the body. They can tell that there is a congenital defect in that fetus, that fetus, in some cases, will die in the womb. Like that woman from Texas, she had twins, one of them died. And so she had to have that one
to save her own life.
To save her own life.
Right.
And that sometimes is what happens. And I believe there's a record that people who are opposed to women making their own choices, that they've manipulated to say that that's abortion after death. Because these are babies who, when the doctors told the family this baby was not going to survive outside the womb, and what they would do is the family would gather for that birth and for the death that would happen within a few minutes. And so that's what these people are now saying is abortion after death.
And these are horrible situations, but the last people who should be in the middle of that are state legislators who think they know better than a woman and her doctor and her clergy and her family to make those difficult decisions.
So now what we're doing, just to add on to that, is that we potentially have an amendment to the Minnesota Constitution that will say that women have total control over their reproductive health.
Right.
That means if they want to
Autonomy.
get sterilized, if they want to terminate a pregnancy, or if they want anything to do with their reproductive health, that
That's
is
their
totally
decision.
their decision.
We're down to less than 4 minutes, Jim. I want to ask you about, we've been talking about what got done, you
Yes.
know, and I know this is rushed because so much did get done. A few things didn't get done. And perhaps the most conspicuous thing that didn't get done is every even-numbered year, the Minnesota Legislature, by tradition, passes what's called a bonding bill,
Yes.
which you call a construction bill.
Yes.
What do you mean by that? And
Now-
what does a bonding or construction bill do?
Yeah, well, first of all, a bond is something that you sell in the bond market. People buy them, and then they get paid interest, and then they can turn in that bond when it matures.
Right.
That's how we borrow money.
To
in the
pay for
state.
things to
You
finance.
cannot
yeah.
pay for operations of the state with bonds. You cannot do that. You can with school districts, but you can't with the state. Okay, so we always go for that bill that requires a 2/3 majority to pass. Now, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans have had a 2/3 majority for years. So what has to happen is we need to get votes from the other side of the aisle, and that's always tough to do. And then I started to examine that a bit, that, hey, wait a second. There are people on the other side of the aisle that we're trying to convince 7 of them to cross the aisle and get us 41 votes so that we can get it passed. And we can't do that sometimes because they have all kinds of excuses, and they wait until the last minutes of the session or even after the end of the session to pass it. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, the big thing is there's all these contractors, all these union members, all these people that sell food in locations that they want to get the construction season started. And here we're sitting here and discussing whether we should fund a tennis court or something so that we can get a bonding bill passed.
Right.
Okay, now there's another construction bill, and that's what we call the cash bill. And we had, people say, oh yeah, well, how did you blow that $18 billion? Well, we did spend a bunch of it on a cash construction bill, which only requires 34 votes. And we have those 34
A majority,
votes.
simple majority.
So, yeah, now, what can you learn from the future? And what I said is, I can learn from the future is that, I can go through and I can see that year in 2023, when we had a lot of money and people were objecting to passing a construction bill, who was it that voted against it? And should they participate in the next bonding bill? And so I put together this sheet, which I've given you a copy of, that has 88 lines on it of senators who voted against the last bonding bill that we had. And in many cases, their reps did too. And so when we talk about who should get this money, should it be Mendota Heights that needs a police station? Their police station is absolutely falling apart.
Right.
Or should we spend it on the water, sports complex?
Yeah.
Or water, freshwater and wastewater treatment for some.
So
some
in other words,
greater
to
Minnesota.
summarize, we're running out of
Yeah.
time. Put your money where your mouth is.
right.
If you need these
Yeah.
things and want them, you got to vote for this. Yeah,
And
very
so
good.
This
Jim
is going to
Carl,
go to the bonding committee next year.
State Senator Jim Carlson of Eagan, Burnsville, Mendota Heights. Thank you for being our guest today on Access to Democracy. Look forward to having you
Thank
on
you,
again
Steve.
soon.
We need another hour.
Always.
Thank you.